America does not have dukes, counts, or royal palaces. In fact, the United States was built with a deep suspicion of inherited titles. But look closer. America has always had elite homes. They were not always called palaces. Sometimes they were called plantations, sometimes townhouses, sometimes summer cottages, sometimes compounds hidden behind gates and trees. And through those homes, you can read a different kind of history. Not just the history of design, but the history of power. Who owned land, who controlled labor, who had access to trade, who wanted to look cultured, who wanted to escape the city, who wanted fame, who wanted privacy, and who could afford to make the outside world disappear. Welcome back to Homestyles Explained, where every homestyle has a story. Today, we are exploring the homes of America's elite through history, from indigenous centers of power and colonial merchant houses to plantation estates, Gilded Age mansions, Hollywood villas, suburban luxury, and modern billionaire compounds. This is not a simple story of beautiful houses. Some of these homes are impressive. Some are uncomfortable. Some are symbols of ambition. Some are symbols of inequality. But together, they reveal one idea very clearly. In America, status was rarely expressed through titles. It was expressed through land, rooms, gates, views, materials, and distance. Before European colonists built Georgian houses or plantation estates, power on this land looked different. In many indigenous communities, the most important dwellings were not private mansions for one family. They were homes and settlements shaped by climate, kinship, ceremony, storage, defense, and community life. In the Southwest, Pueblo and adobe architecture used earth itself as structure. Thick walls moderated heat. Roof lines stayed low. Rooms gathered together like a built landscape. The home did not try to dominate the desert. It belonged to it. In parts of the Northeast, longhouses expressed another kind of order. A longhouse could shelter extended families with fire, storage, work, memory, and social life organized under one long roof. These were not elite homes in the European sense. There was no marble ballroom, no imported staircase, no title carved above a gate. But this matters because it shows the contrast. Before wealth in America became private spectacle, many homes expressed collective survival. The architecture told a different story. Not look how much I own, but this is how we live together with the land, the seasons, and each other. And then with colonization, the meaning of power began to change. The first elite homes of colonial America were not yet giant mansions. They were often Georgian merchant houses, governors' houses, and townhomes built in port cities like Boston, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Newport. Their message was not fantasy. It was order. A central door, balanced windows, brick walls, a formal stair, rooms arranged with hierarchy, public spaces near the front, private spaces behind or above. This symmetry was not just decorative. It was a language imported from Britain. For colonial elites, the house said, I am connected to trade. I understand manners. I belong to the world of law, commerce, empire, and civilized taste. Materials mattered. Brick suggested permanence. Fine woodwork suggested access to skilled labor. A controlled facade suggested a controlled life. These homes were not trying to look romantic. They were trying to look respectable, and that respectability was power. But America's elite would not remain only urban and mercantile. In the South, power expanded across land. The plantation house is one of the most recognizable elite homes in American history. It can also be one of the most misunderstood. From a distance, the visual language is clear. A large house, deep porches, tall columns, shaded galleries, wide lawns, and a powerful position in the landscape. In hot southern climates, some of those details had practical logic. Deep porches created shade. Tall windows and cross breezes helped with heat. Raised foundations could help separate the house from damp ground. But the real meaning of the plantation house cannot be separated from the system that paid for it. These homes were built around plantation agriculture, land ownership, and the exploitation of enslaved people. So the house should never be presented as only romantic, graceful, or grand. Its architecture projected control. The main house was placed to be seen. The landscape was arranged to support production. The separation between the owner's house, workspaces, fields, and enslaved quarters made social hierarchy physical. This was status built into distance. The elite did not just live in a bigger house. They lived at the top of a spatial system. That is why this section matters in a video about elite homes. It shows that beautiful architecture can carry painful history. And after the Civil War, American elite power did not disappear. It moved into new forms: banking, railroads, industry, law, and the city. By the 19th century, elite life in America was increasingly urban. In cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and later Chicago, wealth could be expressed through a townhouse or brownstone. Compared with a plantation house, the message was quieter. A narrow street facade, brownstone steps, tall windows, a parlor floor raised above the sidewalk, iron railings, a formal entry, rooms stacked vertically. This was not power through acreage. It was power through address. The elite city home worked like a social filter. The stoop separated the public street from the private interior. The parlor became a stage for receiving guests. The dining room, library, and drawing room told visitors that the family had education, manners, and cultural confidence. In a dense city, privacy became vertical. Servants might work below stairs or in rear rooms. Family life happened above. Guests were shown only the rooms that performed status best. And here is the interesting part. The urban townhouse did not always need to shout. Its prestige came from location, material, proportion, and the social code of who was invited inside. But by the end of the 19th century, quiet status was no longer enough for some families. Industrial wealth was about to build houses that looked almost impossible. The Gilded Age changed the scale of American elite homes. Railroads, steel, oil, finance, and industry created fortunes so large that older American houses suddenly felt too modest. The new elite wanted more than comfort. They wanted architecture that could compete with European aristocracy, even in a country without aristocratic titles. This is how America got its Gilded Age mansions. The materials became heavier. The staircases became grander. The dining rooms became ceremonial. Ballrooms, libraries, music rooms, conservatories, marble halls, and imported details turned the home into a theater of wealth. In Newport, Rhode Island, the famous summer cottages were cottages in name only. They were seasonal palaces. The joke is important. Calling them cottages made the excess sound casual, as if a marble mansion by the ocean were simply a summer retreat. But the purpose was clear. These homes were machines for social ranking. Who hosted the dinner? Who arrived by carriage? Who was invited to the ballroom? Which family had the more impressive staircase, the more European facade, the more expensive material? The Gilded Age mansion did not whisper status. It staged it, and yet, behind the spectacle, there was always anxiety. Many of these families had enormous money but no noble titles. So the house became a substitute for lineage. Stone, marble, French details, Italian palazzo references, and classical rooms all said, "Our money may be new, but our taste is old." After the public drama of Gilded Age mansions, another elite dream became important: the country estate. On Long Island's Gold Coast, in the Hudson Valley, in the Berkshires, and in other elite landscapes, wealthy families built homes that were less about the city street and more about controlled nature. A long driveway, a gate, a sequence of trees, a house set far back from the road, gardens, lawns, stables, guest houses, service buildings, and private views. The estate turned land into atmosphere. This was not simply a home. It was a world for old money and industrial wealth. The country estate offered something very different from the urban townhouse. It offered distance. Distance from noise. Distance from strangers. Distance from work. Distance from the visible crowd. Inside, the style could vary: Tudor Revival, Georgian Revival, Beaux-Arts, Mediterranean, or rustic lodge. But the underlying message was the same. The elite home was no longer only a building. It was a controlled environment. You did not just own rooms. You owned the approach, the horizon, the gardens, the silence, and the feeling that ordinary life was somewhere far away. And in the 20th century, a different kind of elite emerged. They did not inherit status through old banking families or industrial dynasties. They appeared on screen. Hollywood changed the architecture of American status. In the early 20th century, movie stars and studio figures created a new kind of elite home, especially in Southern California. The Mediterranean villa, Spanish colonial revival house, and hillside mansion became part of the dream. White stucco walls, red tile roofs, arched openings, courtyards, pools, palm trees, terraces facing the city or canyon. Rooms designed for light, parties, and image. This was not the old East Coast elite trying to look European and ancient. This was fame trying to look effortless. Hollywood homes had to do two things at once. They had to hide the celebrity from a public, and they had to produce a fantasy of life that the public could imagine. Privacy and performance lived together. The front gate said, "Do not enter." The pool, terrace, and view said, "Imagine being here." This is why the Hollywood villa feels so different from the Colonial merchant house or the Gilded Age mansion. Its status was not based only on land, family name, or industry. It was based on image. In Hollywood, the elite home became cinematic. After World War II, elite American homes changed again. The most modern house was no longer always the one with the most columns, the largest ballroom, or the heaviest stone facade. In California and other modern landscapes, status began to look lighter. Glass walls, flat or low roofs, open plans, thin structural lines, swimming pools, patios, indoor-outdoor living, a view framed like a movie screen. The mid-century executive home said something new about power. It said, "I am modern. I do not need to copy European palaces. I can live with light, technology, leisure, and landscape." This style was not only for the very rich, of course. Mid-century modern ideas influenced many American homes. But at the elite level, the hillside glass house became a powerful symbol. The view was the new ballroom. Instead of impressing guests with marble staircases, the house impressed them with openness, engineering, sunset, and the feeling of effortless control. The irony is that many of these homes look transparent, but transparency did not mean equality. The glass house still needed the right land, the right view, the right architect, and the right privacy. It made wealth feel relaxed. By the late 20th century, elite American housing became more private, more suburban, and more defensive. The symbols change again. A gated entrance, a long driveway, a large garage, a cul-de-sac, golf course views, double height foyers, large kitchens, multiple living rooms, media rooms, security systems, more square footage than earlier generations would have imagined necessary. Some homes borrowed from European styles, southern porches, Mediterranean villas, French chateaus, or Georgian symmetry all at once. This is where the McMansion becomes important. Not because every luxury suburban home is a McMansion, but because the McMansion reveals a cultural shift. Status became less about one coherent style and more about accumulation. More roof lines, more windows, more rooms, more facade, more height, more signals. The home became a personal monument in a landscape of private lots. But unlike the Gilded Age mansion, the suburban luxury home often wanted to be less public. It was built for comfort, security, family life, resale value, and controlled access. The elite home was no longer only saying, "Look at me." It was also saying, "Keep out." Today, the most elite American homes often do something surprising. They become quieter. Not always smaller, but quieter. A contemporary billionaire compound may use glass, stone, concrete, wood, courtyards, wellness spaces, hidden garages, smart systems, security layers, guest pavilions, art walls, pools, views, and landscape design that makes the property feel almost invisible from the street. The message is different from the Gilded Age. A Vanderbilt mansion wanted to be seen. A modern compound often wants to control who can see anything at all. This is the architecture of privacy, technology, wellness, and retreat. The elite home today may include a gym, spa, cinema, office studio, guest house, outdoor kitchen, wine room, meditation garden, or underground level. But the most important luxury is not always the material. It is control. Control of access, control of sound, control of climate, control of view, control of information, control of who knows where the house begins and ends. That is the modern version of aristocratic distance. Not a title, not a castle, but a private world optimized for people who can afford to make daily life frictionless. So, what do the homes of America's elite really show us? They show that America may not have legal nobility, but it has always had architecture of hierarchy. In indigenous communities, important dwellings could express collective life and relationship to land. In colonial cities, elite homes expressed order, trade, and imported status. On plantations, architecture made power and inequality physical. In townhouses and brownstones, address became a form of prestige. In the Gilded Age, mansions turned wealth into theater. In country estates, privacy became landscape. In Hollywood, fame became architecture. In mid-century homes, status became glass, leisure, and a view. In gated suburbs, luxury became security and scale. And in today's compounds, power often becomes quiet, hidden, and highly controlled. That is the interesting thing about elite homes. They are never just big houses. They are maps of what each era valued most: land, labor, trade, manners, spectacle, lineage, fame, privacy, technology, escape. And maybe that is why these homes fascinate us. Because when society says it has no aristocracy, its houses often reveal the hierarchy anyway. If you enjoyed this journey through the homes of America's elite, subscribe to Homestyles Explained. And tell me in the comments, which era of elite American homes would you want to explore more deeply? The Gilded Age mansions, the Hollywood villas, or the modern billionaire compounds? Because every home style has a story,